Oral questions by members.
Member Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, governing is not easy, and least of all in times of emergency. But yesterday, the Premier was confronted by an issue that I believe his Labour Minister and his government have, so far at least, badly mishandled. And in attempting to sidestep the issue or buy some time to deal with it more properly, the Premier made some comments that I think were terribly unfair and even insulting. No one, and I'll say that again, no one, least of all the hardworking women and men that operate small businesses in British Columbia, is attempting to avoid legal responsibility to employees. Quite the opposite. The operators of those small businesses want to stick around so that they can continue to employ those people, and to suggest or impugn their motives was, I think, terribly unfair of the Premier. The organizations representing small business wrote to the Premier on June the 5th. They laid out the challenge and they proposed a solution. They also acknowledged that the government had granted a 3-week extension previously, but they said with the continuation of the state of emergency, a further extension is going to be required, and if they don't get it, they are going to have what they called regulated insolvency. That's a polite term for government-imposed bankruptcy. The mechanism for providing relief exists. Other governments have used it. The federal government apparently used a similar mechanism today. The Labour Minister has said no. Yesterday, the Premier seemed to say, well, maybe. This is not a great time to be imposing additional uncertainty on small businesses that are struggling to survive. Will the Premier end that uncertainty today and direct his Labour Minister to grant the extension that's been requested? And while he's doing so, will he apologize to the hardworking men, women, families that feel very badly for having heard the Premier impugn their motives yesterday?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member opposite, and I certainly do understand the challenges British Columbians are facing. Perhaps more than most others in this place, I feel it every day when challenges come my way, when over the past 100 days we had been working cooperatively. Every day, another challenge. So forgive me if I don't take the sincerity of the Minister as genuine at this point in time. What I will say is that we felt there was a mechanism within the Act that was appropriate, we, the Minister and I, and we sent that message to the community. The community responded. You helped me read the letter I'd already read by reading bits of it that were salacious and in your interest as opposition members. I thanked you for that and said I would deal with it this week. I don't know what more, Honourable Member, you want me to do other than to agree that more discussion is required. But I want to take us back to the beginning here, because this is uncharted territory for all of us: government, opposition, businesses, workers, people. And yesterday, if we want to talk about people who made statements that were unreasonable, the Leader of the Opposition said this wasn't about public health measures. Well, for goodness sakes, of course it is. If we're going to build confidence in the community, not just for going out for a walk or expanding our bubble, but engaging in economic activity again, they need to be confident that the public health measures are genuine and we're all adhering to them. That's the approach that we've been taking. That's the approach we'll continue to take. And when we come up to an obstacle where people disagree, we will sit down and try and work it out. That's what we're going to do this week. And I thank the Minister for bringing it up. But I really think that there's other issues that we could talk about. We talked about it yesterday. I agreed with you that we will talk to the business community about this. I don't know what more we can do beyond that.
Member Abbotsford West on a supplemental.
Thanks, Honourable Speaker. At a time when unemployment in the province is rapidly escalating, I can hardly think of a more critical issue. I can hardly think of another issue that wouldn't be a priority or the priority for the government. The government has been aware of this for several months. to describe what was in the letter as salacious is puzzling. I'll use that word. Where an agency has written to the Premier, outlined an issue, a challenge, proposed a solution, received a reply from the Minister that shuts the door completely on what seems to be, for other jurisdictions, a reasonable response. 4 of the signatories to that letter, 4 by my count, are members of the Premier's own Economic Recovery Task Force. So to today stand and describe the letter and its contents as salacious is an interesting characterization. The assistance they are seeking from the government doesn't cost the provincial government a dime. It is a mechanism that has been used elsewhere. The minister's lame reply is one the Premier has now repeated on 2 occasions. Well, apply for a variance. Well, that could take months. This is not a time to impose additional uncertainty on small businesses. These are family-owned businesses that are struggling to survive, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier, I'll ask him again, and I suspect he'll say again, well, I'll get to it when I talk to some of these people later in the week, despite the fact that the issue has been before us for several months now. Take the entirely reasonable step and grant the extension that other governments have granted, that the federal government has granted, and throw a lifeline to small businesses who don't want to permanently terminate employees. They want to survive so that they can continue to employ those employees.
Premier.
Well, Speaker, well, I'll remind the member how we responded to the challenges of COVID-19. We took advice and counsel from public health officials. We worked with the business community, we worked with organized labor, we worked with not-for-profits, we worked with Indigenous communities to find a way we could all work together to address issues as they emerged. We extended the period previous to today, extended the period for businesses to apply. And giving an opportunity to have a discussion, we said you could seek a variance. We're going to be moving to phase 3 of a 4-phase restart. We're seeing more and more economic activity every day. That's all good news. Fundamental to that is public confidence in our system of regulation. In fact, the very businesses that the member speaks to have been saying repeatedly they want to ensure that public health officials, WorkSafe officials, are certifying their businesses as safe for consumers. That's the essence of a public health response to a public health crisis. And how do we grow the economy back to where we want it to be? By working together. When issues come up, we discuss them, we put forward solutions. We thought we had a viable solution. You disagree, members of the business community disagree. The appropriate response to that, honourable member, is to have a discussion, and that's exactly what I propose to do come Thursday when we have a scheduled meeting to discuss these issues.
Member Abbotsford West on a second supplemental.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, that does not appear to be the approach taken by the government by the Labour Minister, who simply said no. He simply said no. Small businesses, those family-owned businesses, aren't in any way, shape, or form quarreling with the adoption of the public health protective measures that have been advocated by Dr. Henry, by the government. Far from it. What they are saying to the government is, with the stroke of a regulatory pen, you can prevent us from doing something we don't want to do and employees don't want us to do, and that is permanently terminate our employees. Many of these businesses have not been able to operate. They are at their fiscal wit's end, and the triggering of a legally binding severance obligation will put those businesses under. There won't be any work for the employees to go back to. It is an amazingly straightforward request and a logical one in these uncertain times, and I'm disappointed, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier's response seems to be, let the uncertainty continue, we'll talk and we'll see what we can come up with. Right now, all those businesses know is what the Labour Minister has said on behalf of the government, which is no, make a variance application, and we'll get back to you when we get back to you.
Premier.
Speaker, what those businesses know, or at least the umbrella organizations know, is, as we reached out to them yesterday and said, we'll put this on the agenda for Thursday and we'll talk it through and come up with a solution that meets the needs of everyone. That's what they know now. What they also know now, Honourable Speaker, is the official opposition, rather than identifying a problem, bringing it forward, getting an appropriate response to that, has brought it back for a second day. And I can only imagine that they're doing that for purposes beyond getting a resolution, because I committed yesterday to that very course of action. I appreciate that the member is no longer in government, but he seems to have forgotten the complexities of the challenges that we face, not just in normal times, but in a time of a global pandemic. We have been working tirelessly, all of us in this place, to make sure we're meeting the needs of the people in our communities. The economy is all about people. Without people, we have no economy. Without businesses, people don't have a place to go to work. Without workers, businesses don't have a business to operate. Working together is what we've been doing. Working together is what we'll continue to do to get a resolution to this issue.
Member Richmond, Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier just said that they reached out to the business community yesterday. His minister has known about this issue for weeks, and they just reached out yesterday. The Premier then says, referring to the letters, calling them salacious. As my colleague has said, of the 15 that signed the letter, 4 of them are on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force, including the Business Council of BC, Vancouver Board of Trade, the Surrey Board of Trade, and the BC Chamber of Commerce. So the groups that he's tapped to guide this province towards economic recovery are complaining about his leadership and the Minister of Labour. Now, the Labour Minister was clear last Thursday, Mr. Speaker, when he said he has no intention of extending the temporary layoff time limits. Yesterday, while the Minister sat in silence, as he is doing today, the Premier gave a very different answer, which sounded like a maybe, saying maybe provides no certainty to small businesses or workers. The request is simple, Mr. Speaker. Extend layoff time limits to the end of August, plus an additional 6 weeks once emergency orders are lifted. And as our leader has said, many other governments across the country have done so. The Labour Minister has had another day to think about it. He's sitting right there. Does he now intend to extend the temporary layoff limits or not?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I speak for the government, and it is a cross-government approach that we brought to this issue and to a host of other issues that have emerged over the past 100 days, in fact, over the past 3 years. It's always been my approach to make sure that we're cooperating on this side of the House, we reach out to those who want to work with us on the other side of the House, and most importantly, we connect with people in communities and in sectors to make sure we're on the right track. That's what, no, it is this time, remember, it is this time. They raised the issue, we responded to it initially by extending the period. They raised the issue again, we said there's an opportunity for variance. They don't like that, so we're going to have more discussion later in the week. I reached out to them yesterday as I've reached out to them the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that. For weeks, for months, we've been having conversations, Honourable Member, and I appreciate that may offend you, but that's how we roll on this side of the House. We need input. We've got input. You've aided us by elevating it to a point of crisis when, in fact, it is not. We are going to protect those businesses. We're going to protect those workers' rights to severance if they deserve it, and that's how we're going to get through this process, working together, employers, employees, community, and legislators to help everybody get out of this mess that we did not create.
Member Richmond, Queensborough on a supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact that 15 different organizations have together and send a letter to this government clearly tells you the process isn't working. They weren't being listened to by that minister. He has said, and you are saying, that the process within government at the moment can deal with some of these issues. The minister's suggestion was that variance applications are the solution. That comment is absurd. And the business community has said it's insulting. There is currently a 3,000 application backlog, and the current situation creates the potential for up to 30,000 businesses filing at once in early July, Mr. Speaker. This is a bureaucratic nightmare in regards to paperwork for stressed-out small business owners who are on the brink of bankruptcy. Yet the minister continues to pretend it's a viable option. To the minister, how long will it take a small business to get a variance application approved?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm really happy to stand and answer these questions here today. Mr. Speaker.
Members, the Minister of Labour has the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, as we have canvassed over a number of days, that we do understand the challenges that the workers and employers are facing due to COVID-19 pandemic. And Mr. Speaker, we listened. our action, actually, we demonstrated through our actions. When we were approached for help, we acted. We extended the temporary layoff provisions to 16 weeks. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we put together a support package for the businesses, $1.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, tax cuts and tax deferrals, property tax cut by 25%, represents $700 million to support the businesses that are going through these tough times. Mr. Speaker, I just want to make it clear, our employment standard is distinctly different than other jurisdictions that they have mentioned. Mr. Speaker, other jurisdictions don't have that provision where employer and employee working together can go to employment standard and ask for extension. We have those provisions in there. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, having said that, we've been very clear.
Members.
We've been very clear that right now, when we extended from 13 to 16 weeks over a month ago, we also made it clear to the businesses and to the workers that that provision is available to them if they choose to go to the employment standard for extension beyond 16 weeks. Mr. Speaker, so far, very few has applied. The member talked about 3,000. Member talked about 3,000 backlog. That is a backlog for other complaints by members. Mr. Speaker, that is by the workers against their employee. You know what? You want to talk about backlog? You know where we got to the backlog, Mr. Speaker? Because that side, when they were in government, they cut employment standard in half. They laid off half the workers in the employment standard, Mr. Speaker. That's how we are trying to clean up the mess that they have created in the employment standard, Mr. Speaker. But we have said the other day, Premier is very clear. We are willing to talk to the businesses. We will work with them. If extension is needed, we'll talk to them. In the meantime, Section 72 is available to workers and to the... Mr. Speaker, one thing is clear. We will not compromise workers' hard-earned benefits and rights that they've earned over the years. But we will support the businesses at the same time so that they can restart their businesses.
House Leader, third party.
Member for Saanich, North and the Islands. Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry?
Member for Saanich, North and the Islands.
Okay. Member Saanich, North and the Islands. And
yeah, thank you,
third
Mr.
party
Speaker.
leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we noted yesterday, the government spends $1.3 billion contracting long-term care to for-profit companies and not-for-profit societies. 93% of the sector's revenues are funded through BC taxpayers. Given the magnitude of the public expenditure and the vulnerability of the population served, it's reasonable to ask whether sufficient financial oversight is in place to ensure that BC seniors are receiving the best possible care for the money that we've invested. Unfortunately, the answer seems to be no. Contracted care homes are required to provide their health authority with annual audited financial statements. These statements are available to the public if the care home is operated by a not-for-profit society. But for-profit operators are not obliged to make their audited financial statements available to the public. Considering that for-profit companies are already not delivering hundreds of thousands of hours of care that they are publicly funded to provide, my question through you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Health. Why are we not requiring significantly more disclosure from for-profit care home operators, especially considering significant public resources are going into these facilities?
Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. The member will know that historically, in the past, the healthcare system, the long-term care system, was a more direct system. It was, there were independent long-term care contractors, but everyone operated under the same collective agreement, and there weren't any subcontractors. Over the past couple of decades, that changed, and we mostly have a system, a contracted system that includes a very significant for-profit private sector, nonprofit private sector, and importantly, subcontractors. This was the situation in 2017-18 reflected in the report that he refers to from Isabel McKenzie, the seniors advocate in BC. So what have we done? We've increased the standard of care for everybody in the system by increasing the care hours for all residents. And this is important. And put behind that auditing measures that support it. And those are very significant changes because they improved the quality of care. Currently, the accountability the member talks to comes in through data spreadsheets, and that old-fashioned methodology makes the accountability he wishes more difficult. I agree. And that's why we're moving to a web-based tool that allows broader information so we can find the very information required to ensure that the money taxpayers spend goes for the care that residents deserve. And that's what we're doing. In addition, in the coming year, we'll be reviewing contracting and the contracting system with our partners in the sector with the goal of making things better for residents. So there needs to be more accountability, I agree, and there will be. The Seniors Advocate Report reflects the situation 2017-18, and we are working together with all of the partners in long-term care to improve accountability for residents, to improve the accountability of care, but also increase care standards. And that's what we've done. And that has served us well in British Columbia as compared to other jurisdictions in North America in the last few weeks.
Leader, third party on a supplemental.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister of Health for the detailed answer, straightforward answer. We've seen through the, as he noted, the BC Seniors Advocate, Isabel McKenzie, has a detailed report, and in that report, it highlights how the accountability mechanisms and transparency mechanisms are different by contract, by operator, by health authority. It seems like there is, as I think as the Minister acknowledged, a wide variety of different mechanisms in place, making it very, very difficult to be able to get a really good understanding of how $1.3 billion is being spent, $1.3 billion of taxpayers' money is being spent. And so I appreciate the Minister acknowledging that, that there will be greater accountability measures being put in place. Can the Minister please let British Columbians know and let us know here through you, Mr. Speaker, when British Columbians can expect those accountability measures to be in place?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And I think you see it now. You see it in the application of the 3.36 monies, which have been supported by all parties in the legislature. You see it in the restoration of the rights of workers in Bill 47. You see it in the change in accountability models. You see it in the money that's being provided to ensure that workers' wages are leveled up during this period when people are under provincial health orders. It's called the single site order, to ensure that workers get the money that's being provided to ensure that their wages are leveled up. And all of these other changes are important. And you see it in the daily hard work of medical health officers who do the work at long-term care homes everywhere in BC, working for health authorities and working with care providers to ensure the quality of care is high. And when it's not, as was the case at Comox Seniors Village, as in the case of Nanaimo Seniors Village, as is in the case of Selkirk here in Victoria, as in the case in Summerland, with the support of members of all sides of the House, medical health officers and health authority boards and myself intervene to ensure the quality of care is protected. It is important to all of us. It is what we owe to people, to residents in long-term care, and it's what we're continuing to work to improve, working with all the partners in long-term care in the coming weeks and months.
Member Prince George Valemont.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Premier continues to attempt to make this sound like a complicated decision that he needs to keep waiting for some phone call on Thursday. Let's be clear. It's as simple as saying yes today. And you know, it's interesting because obviously it wasn't just the Labour Minister who was the only one on the government side who would be aware of the devastating impacts of the lack of action on the temporary layoff period. As a matter of fact, on April the 28th, the Jobs Minister told the Vancouver Board of Trade, and I quote, "One of our big concerns is mass displacement of employer and employees." Employees don't want to be suddenly severed. And the same thing goes for employers. They want to keep their employees, end quote. So perhaps the Minister of Jobs can stand up for the very people who employ British Columbians. Does she agree with the Minister of Labour's lack of action and his decision to say no to an extension of the temporary layoff time limit?
Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. Obviously, we as a government, we want to support workers and businesses to ensure that their businesses survive and they restart the economy. Everyone, Mr. Speaker, wants to be a part of a strong recovery as we continue through our restart plan. We will continue to defend the rights of the workers, as many are struggling from the impact of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. We will also continue to work with employers and businesses through the restart into our recovery. That's why, as I mentioned, $1.8 billion there was immediate relief provided to our businesses. We worked with the federal government in order to help the businesses and workers during this tough time. The support for businesses include, as I mentioned, cutting property taxes by 25%, deferral of many business taxes, including carbon tax, employer health tax, PST, 75% wage subsidy, deferral of WCB premiums, and waiver of premiums of certain employers, Mr. Speaker. Commercial rent assistance program with a provincial ban on commercial eviction. So we will continue to work with the businesses towards a strong recovery.
Member Prince George Vilmont on a supplemental.
Well, that's an interesting answer from the Minister of Labour. And what businesses in British Columbia want to hear from this minister is him change his decision to say no to an absolutely critical request that they have made. This is not business as usual. And here's what the BC Chamber of Commerce had to say, and I quote, "By not extending the temporary layoff period, this government is knowingly hampering the business community's earnest attempts at restart," end quote. So apparently the Minister of Jobs understood how devastating it would be if there were mass displacement of employees. I'm not sure why the Minister of Labour and in fact the Premier of British Columbia don't understand that. So let's ask the Minister of Jobs, how many businesses does she estimate will inevitably have to declare bankruptcy as a result of the lack of action by her very own government?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we fully understand the difficulty that the businesses and the workers are going through this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, many workers and employers alike, they feel this temporary layoff could become permanent. They're worried about their loved ones. They're worried about the jobs. Mr. Speaker, we want to support them. That's why we extended the temporary layoff provisions to 16 weeks. That's why we put together a relief program, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we said that we will continue to listen. Premier have mentioned very clearly that we will talk to the business community. We believe that the provision in the employment standard exists right now to help those employers who needs to extend past 16 weeks, Mr. Speaker. But in the meantime, they could go to the employment standard branch and ask for extension. Like I said, very few have gone to the employment standard, asked for extension. Very few, Mr. Speaker. Maybe less than a dozen. So, Mr. Speaker, that avenue is available today, but we are going to continue to work with those businesses to ensure if extension is needed, that system doesn't work for them, we are open to discussions. And make sure, Mr. Speaker, if that extension is awarded, I want to make sure that the workers' rights and workers' benefits are not compromised. At the same time, we are supporting businesses to restart.
Member North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the federal government extended the Canada Emergency Response Benefit to August 29th for a total of 24 weeks. Today, they extended the time period for temporary layoffs for up to 6 months, giving employers more time to recall employees who were laid off due to COVID-19. This is what the federal minister said today. We know that many employers who've had to temporarily lay off employees intend to bring them back to work. However, there is still a great deal of uncertainty regarding exactly when that will be possible. That's why we are taking action. The federal government is taking action to protect the jobs of those employees and to support those employers by giving them more time to recall their employees. The federal government is protecting and supporting. Why is this minister not taking every step to make sure that temporary layoffs don't become permanent?
Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I have said before that our employment standard is distinctly different than federal government, federal act, and the other jurisdictions. Our act allows employer to work with their employees, the impacted employees, to go to the employment standard and ask for extension, Mr. Speaker. Very few have taken the opportunity to ask for that extension. Mr. Speaker, having said that, Mr. Speaker, no, we have actually communicated with the businesses and workers over a month ago when we extended temporary layoff to 16 weeks, Mr. Speaker. They knew over a month, but very few have taken the opportunity to go to the employment standard. Mr. Speaker, having said that,
Members, we shall hear the response. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am so proud to belong to government. For the last year, we had the lowest unemployment in the country, Mr. Speaker, as a result of our policies, and the highest economic growth in the country, Mr. Speaker. And we improved services that the people depend on, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, we know what it takes to put people in the center to develop policies around. People of the province appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. They're happy that they're sitting on that side, that they're not governing at this time during the pandemic, Mr. Speaker.
The bill ends question period.